Welcome. Okay, so this is, instead of doing a talk, I decided to do a panel. It's much easier. It's much more fun, too. We can get spicy and get some hot takes of the day and all that good stuff. So before we jump into all that, let me just give a brief, deeper intro of our panelists. By the way, I pretty much picked everyone just by the people I like to hang out with and chat with, and like who I think are cool. So, so this is, these are some of the hottest VCs represented here. So Peter Deng, who I know we're in like odd orders, I guess. So Peter is general partner at Felicis Ventures. We've now co-invested in a company together, which is really cool. Former VP of product at OpenAI, CPO at Airtable. Formerly at Meta, 10 years, headed up Instagram product. And yeah, I mean, he's one of obviously the most impressive operators in the space. So when he turned VC, it was a huge deal. And he's just really impactful in the companies he works with. And so I'm blessed to be able to invest with him and work with him. So welcome, Peter.
Thank you.
And then Sarah Catanzaro, so GP at Amplify, one of the deepest technical VCs I've ever encountered. She even intimidates some of the technical founders I meet. It's just awesome. Invested in companies like LangChain and Modal and Runway ML, some of the most impressive companies. Again, a theme here, operator turned VC. So always impressive for me. Thought leader, writes a newsletter that's read by many. So welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
Okay, and next is Brian. So Brian actually met, I can't remember if I met your sister or I met you first. I think I met you first, and then you introduced me to your sister.
Around the same time.
Around the same time, yeah. So if you didn't know, Brian's sister is Stephanie Zhan over at Sequoia, and I've now
I didn't know that. Okay.
You didn't know that?
No,
What?
I didn't know that either.
I've now invested with both the Zhans now, so there's a theme here.
Yes.
With Reflection and super sharp. Now with Stryker Venture Partners.
Yeah.
So you started with working with Max. So Brian focuses on very much on the very early stage inception phase of companies. Actually, it's interesting in your GPT bio, your ChatGPT bio here, it doesn't even talk about your Facebook. So one of the things that when we first met, like he was a former Facebook engineer. And like I just kind of we flowed, and I was like, okay, this guy was former, did something cool. And so how long were you at Facebook?
2 years.
Yeah. So he was a former engineer over there. So I love it when engineers actually help other founding engineers and so on. But welcome. And then lastly, Sarah Guo, who has probably the best ground game I've ever seen for any VC. She's everywhere. You hack, you do meetups, you're just everywhere. Early stage, so she's founding and managing partner of Conviction, AI-focused early stage firm, and basically backed some pretty awesome companies, Cognition, Harvey, Mistral. You're on I don't know how many Midas lists every time I look around. But you also like I said, you have a ground game. You are kind of the voice of early stage startups, and I see you everywhere. And I know you do a podcast, right, with Elon? That's really cool. So yeah, it's just awesome to witness your power on LinkedIn and then Twitter. So welcome. Awesome. So these are our panelists. Anything that on your bios that I got wrong or ChatGPT got wrong?
ChatGPT doesn't make mistakes.
Yeah, never makes mistakes. No. Former OpenAI guy says it all. There it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. All right. So let's kick it off with this is a softball. Let's start here, I guess. So I get pitched all the time by startups. A lot of them open source centric, right? Because of the work I've done the last several years, and I've gotten pitches anywhere from hey, I have 10,000 GitHub stars, do you want to give me your money? Basically a lot of those kind of pitches. And I don't know, I think GitHub stars are cool, but they're maybe not a great indicator of success for a founding team. I guess when you're getting pitches, I guess what is, this is for everyone, by the way. I'm kind of maybe I'll start with you, Brian. What is the metric that you actually look? I know you look at early stage, but is there a metric you look at if somebody's pitching that they're going to take an open source project or doesn't have to be an open source project, but is there something you look at that kind of indicates to you that they're on the right path, or yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, we at Stryker we we really focus on inception stage investing, and 1 in 4 of them have turned into unicorns to date. And so we really try to look for the signals that the company will certainly succeed. GitHub stars, Hacker News points, those are signs of those are great to have, like it's signs of early traction. But ultimately what matters the most to us is like the founder's conviction, like the founder's clarity of purpose. Like to give you guys an example, like we backed like Reflection AI, and Reflection is most well known because they just raised $2 billion at an $8 billion valuation from NVIDIA, DST, and other parties. But when we backed Reflection, it was just Misha and Giannis, 0 lines of code written, with a clarity of ambition that they wanted to be the frontier American open source model. And we, when founders have that kind of like clarity of purpose, they have that conviction without hedging. As Jensen once said, the best founders build before it's obvious. They build with conviction. And that is what we look for, founders who build early in spaces that are about to happen and have the edge to make it the very best company.
Yeah, when I met them, by the way, for the first time, I was like blown away. I'm like, oh, just another couple of researchers out of DeepMind. It's just no, they were different. They came across way different. I don't know, what do you think, Sarah? By the way, this is like perfect for the name of your
Yeah, we also believe in strong conviction.
I heard conviction a lot.
Brian is completely right about this. We did not plan this, but I'd say like Reflection, Giannis and Misha were in our grant program, Embed. And so, we take 2 different stances at different stages of company. At the very early stage, we are entirely interested in just, our assessment of the people from both a technical and product talent perspective, your ability to command other people to your cause.
Yep.
Getting attention is like one channel for that, right? Like, you need people to know about a project for it to become successful, right? So it is a useful dimension. It is not sufficient. When we think about like long-term investments for the firm, then we really care about trying to understand what the real value is, right? And so that's everything from trying the product ourselves, right? Because some things, as your developer, you look at it, you try it, you look at the abstractions, you're like, this is nonsense. I would just write it myself, right? To, maybe just using your, we love open source. I actually worked briefly at Docker. It was an investment from my last firm, but just because that's an example everybody here would know as well, right? Like, that company's an amazing company, had a long journey. There's a real big difference between like, we have a project, people think the project is interesting, right? People use this technology in a way that's connected to a commercial entity that can make money from a business model perspective. And so I think stars are kind of like really early in the cycle of anybody has heard of it. And so it's some combination, I think, of judgment on potential like long-term value. And then, we don't think we know all as developers. We'll go call users, right? And so I think understanding who's using it in production, how actually useful something is kind of step 2 for us.
Makes sense.
Makes sense. For me, I'd say forks over stars, just like
interesting.
That will get you in the door, but that won't be all we look for. So what I look for is I look for grit in the first meeting. And it's like you have to have enough grit because times are going to get rough. There's going to be competition. But is there enough grit in that first meeting, in the early meeting, to show me that you've actually talked to 100 customers and you've polished exactly the problem that you're looking to solve for the customer, especially if it's pre-product, right? So that clarity of thought, plus one to what you said about clarity of thought, but also show me that you actually put in the work, because you have to have that. Like we just recently funded, 3 MIT athletes, and I love that because these are the people who are, 1, went to MIT, and 2, woke up at 4 a.m. every morning to go to the gym to go and like do both things really well. That's a sign of that grit. And when you come back and say, hey, we've talked to 100 people in the last week, and this is exactly what they told us, this is the problem, that shows me that you're going to be able to grind in the really hard times, which inevitably all great companies will have.
Yeah, so I think one thing that all of the panelists have articulated is that we really focus on founders, especially at the early stage. Typically when people ask how I make investment decisions, I will say, people, 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 product, market. And so I have been thinking more recently about like, what is it that I look for in people? Perhaps this is a kind of like lazy approach, but like, I look for people that can kind of change my mind. I look for people who can, really challenge me intellectually. This is definitely not to say that like I am the smartest person in the world. Like I'm clearly not, as you hear, the other panelists speak. But oftentimes I find like conversations with researchers and engineers, it feels like mental Pilates, but then like sometimes it feels like CrossFit. And like I want that like intensity of like, I am struggling here to like keep up with this person, to really, engage in the conversation. And I find like, sentence after sentence that like, they are convincing me of, something that I didn't believe before. So, I think that is ultimately what I really look for. There are metrics that I think matter, particularly in today's competitive environment. I think like the pace of execution is so key. So like, if you want to point to numbers, look at pull request cycle time, or like the number of deploys per day, metrics like that. But I really, despite the fact that before going into venture, I built a platform for VCs to make decisions with data. I really don't consider myself a metrics-driven investor.
Interesting.
Can I describe something that I think is kind of interesting
Sure.
here? So we have this grant program called Embed that I mentioned. We get thousands of applications for it. We only have a few investors.
Yeah.
And so one of the instincts was like, train a model to like do first take on the applications.
Oh, wow.
So we did. But to your point, like we found it quite hard to get any signal out of it. Like we get rid of spam, right?
Yeah.
But like in venture, you actually really want the variance, and it's very hard to keep the spikiness in when you're trying to do prediction of success.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think everybody here is a strong believer. Everybody here is a strong believer in machine learning.
Yeah.
But I think like many of the traits are not well captured that you look for in entrepreneurs. Like if I'm like, how does Peter measure grit in a meeting?
Yeah.
I think it would, like, being entirely metrics oriented in your evaluation of entrepreneurs empirically for us, like you end up getting like, well, yes, on average, if somebody has worked for 10 years at Facebook, they will be a more competent engineer than somebody who does not have engineering experience or worked at a lesser company.
Yeah.
But we're not looking for the average, right? Because the average entrepreneur doesn't get very far.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So what we're saying, Joe, is our jobs will never be automated.
Love it. All right. Amazing answers. Thank you. All right. Switching gears. This question is for both Peter and Sarah C. And everyone else, chime in if you want. And there's some personal interest in I'm intrigued by your answers here. So, I mean, you both came from being operators and kind of builders yourself, and I'm too chicken to go one way or the other, I guess. No, I work as a product person, but I also like dabble, right? But you all went at some point. You went all in, right? You went down to the VC path. Like, I guess, and by the way, this is where I really value VCs who have this experience. But what has changed for you? Like, has the lens changed? Is it are you, is your perspective different on what success is and what isn't? And how has it really changed your perspective overall and how you see the world basically? Now that you're basically writing checks and you're very, you're focused more on building companies versus obviously building products.
You want to go first?
Sure. It's funny because we were actually talking about some orthogonal topics as we walked on stage. It's interesting for me because as I kind of alluded to before, in my last operating role, I was leading the data and AI team at a company called Mattermark. So we were building a product for VCs. We were building a product to collect unstructured information on startups, transform it into structured information that VCs could use to make investment decisions. I think as a VC, I appreciate like the four-dimensional chess of markets more. It does mean, however, that our own objectives, while clear, our goal is to kind of like maximize TVPI and DPI. They're distant. And there is, so much complexity associated with, even knowing if you're doing the right thing. What I had said to Peter is like, I'm 10 years into my career in venture, and like, I still don't know if I'm good at it. And so like, it's just a very different way of operating where you're not really, marching towards these kind of near-term milestones. You're trying to think about like, the world that various entrepreneurs can engender, and to what extent that aligns with your own expectations of the future. So I find it's just a very different cognitive exercise. The other thing which I enjoy, and I think also which shapes your perspective, is that like as a VC you're constantly context switching. You're not just context switching between maybe looking at a company that is focused on computational biology to a company that is focused on data center networking. You're also switching between sourcing deals, competing for deals, acting as a board member. And so, that also somewhat shapes your perspective and fundamentally also changes the way you work.
Yeah. For me, I'm only 8 months in, maybe 7 months in, so I'm still in the honeymoon phase, I would say. I'm still loving it, and I think that I'll continue to love it, primarily because I actually don't see that much difference between what I'm doing here and what I did before, right? I've had the privilege of being in several great companies, Facebook, before it was called Meta. I never worked at Meta, I only worked at Facebook. Instagram, Oculus, Uber, Airtable, and OpenAI. And at some point, what was great is like I was able to help teams by just using my pattern recognition, because I'd just seen so many different types of business models and businesses. And to this day, I feel like I'm still doing that for founders, and I'm just doing it with a check, right? Here's a check, but also here's the time. So true story, on Monday, we got a bunch of founders flying in that I've been working with, and we're doing a 2-hour product session. And that's like no different than what I was doing before as a product executive, to be like, great, let's bring the research, let's do the jam, and let's figure out how to really build this business. And that's been really rewarding, to be able to do that across multiple companies and support multiple founders at the same time, both just with capital, but also advice and looking around the corner and helping them connect to the right customers or other advisors, or bringing amazing kind of angel investors on board where we make investments. So it feels almost the same thing. It's all supporting founders, slightly different lens, but the motions feel, part of the most exciting parts of my previous product jobs.
We definitely need to grab coffee. I need to pick your brain more. Okay, so switching gears again, I guess this is probably for Sarah G and Brian. It's like, I think, from what I see, I see VCs like in almost like not quite two camps. I'll just put my binary classifier on here, but like there's like the hustlers, and then there's like the VCs that are like kind of big. They're kind of super established. They come to us. We're you're going to come to us regardless, whatever. And I feel like in this kind of day and age, like the hustlers are winning. Like the cool kids are the ones that like really dive, honestly, I could ask this question to all four of you, but like, roll up your sleeves, like get into the weeds, like look on, on GitHub, like looking at commits. Is this the new way, like for AI, like VCs, and how you have to operate? Do you have to go all the way down? And I get invited to dinners all the time, and like with engineers, and it's like the conversations are really deep. And like not all VCs have that level of like depth and understanding, and I feel like you really need it. But I'm kind of curious. Like, you're probably two examples of folks that I see hustling day after day. I don't know. What are your thoughts on kind of like the new VC? I'll start with Sarah, maybe. Like, what do you think about the new VC world here?
Yeah, I'm pretty opinionated about it, right? I think you like don't start a firm unless you feel like you like have an idea how to do business.
Yeah.
So I'll give you a view on like where I think the venture industry is very quickly, and then on like some specific like ways we engage with founders in the community. Like the birth of the venture industry 50 to 70 years ago was characterized by like not a lot of capital available, but the spirit of entrepreneurship existed and opportunity has always existed, right? I think it's bigger now than it has ever, but if there are 5 firms willing to hand entrepreneurs money to do technology ventures, then all you kind of got to do is like put the sign on Sand Hill Road and say like, please come by and pitch me. I'm available from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Thursday, right? I don't think the world looks like that now. And so a big piece of it is, the analogy in my mind is like, well, one, like the internet happened, right? Which means that there's distribution of information to lots of people through OpenAI and through the broader resources available to everyone, where if you cannot imagine that in every other business we're like, SaaS is internet distribution of software, and consumers do research, and they get advertising versus just buying things when they walk into a store. And that wouldn't happen in venture, right? And so our view now is, well, like entrepreneurs, potential entrepreneurs, engineers out there, they have a lot of resources out there to get pretty far themselves, and they're gonna do research, right? And so we feel like we need to go make it clear to the community like what our value prop is, and that it's a much more competitive market, most of all. And then part of our decision when we started a firm is we're like, we think this AI thing is real, we've just been thinking about it for a long time, we're like willing to make a commitment. And so what do? You go like spend a lot of time with the people who are really talented and central to the community, like you, people in PyTorch community, researchers, and then try to understand it better. Because I think it's a key premise for us that the world is changing very quickly. Entrepreneurs are going to figure that out. They want to work with people who have a point of view and might be useful in figuring that out if they have a wealth of choices, right? I think the last thing I'll say on this is like every industry, parts of venture are very lucrative and very interesting. I'm just gonna state the obvious there. And if it is like I feel so lucky to be able to do this job. If it is a lucrative and super interesting and perhaps influential industry, then like you shouldn't be able to like be really lazy and not face competition. You know what I mean? And so I think there's a distribution of work ethic in the industry.
Definitely.
And so I would like to think that like generally when you work harder, you get better outcomes.
Yeah. What do you think, Ryan?
Well, I would say at Stryker Venture Partners, like we are just 3 people, right? It's Max Gazor, who's a 4 times Forbes Midas List investor, myself, and Nikhil, who is a founding engineer at Mercor. And so we really try to focus on just like being at the frontier of research and just identifying who are the very best people and spending time with them. And then like spending most of our time just helping the companies. And when we help companies, we're not trying to like organize dinners for them. We really try to focus on like creating the crucial moments that will change the trajectories of the companies. And so, for example, like one of the companies that I backed before was Voyage AI. And for Voyage, Tongyi had a very ambitious vision. He wanted to make vector embedding search a reality long before anybody knew what vector embedding models were. He wanted every single enterprise to use it, but like even in the research world, many people weren't even sure if vector embeddings were going to be important. Sarah backed the company as well at the inception stage. And like it's like one of the most impactful things for the companies was really the MongoDB partnership, which we helped forge, and that partnership turned out to be so fruitful that it ended up leading to the company's like a very great acquisition for the company. And so we really try to like spend most of our time creating these crucial moments for the company, and we spend less of our time trying to create the presence.
I thought you were going to say they forked Vice, although I think a lot of those vector database companies did. That's how they got started. But
yeah.
Okay, so we have just over 5 minutes to go. I have a couple of spicy questions for us to finish up on.
Do it.
Right.
I want to start with Peter and then Brian on this one, and then I'll go to the Sarahs for the last one. Okay, so and the reason I picked you two for this one is because you both are involved directly or in like previously with companies that pre-train models. And my thesis here is that I'm a semiconductor guy, at least that was where I spent a lot of my early career, and the foundry and the process nodes almost are like generations of models. It was so expensive to get to. I mean, I won't betray my age in terms of like process node I started designing chips on, but like to get to the next node was like billions of dollars, right? I mean, you go from like 90 nano to 65 to 40 to 28, and then now we have 3 nanometer right now, and really there's like a handful of companies, if not really one company, doing it with TSMC. So like at this point in time, I mean, are we really consolidating in terms of like the frontier labs, and like how does the rest of the world, is RL the new thing and everyone's going to do RL, or like how does the rest of these companies really provide value or differentiate when they can't pre-train, or should they raise a bunch of money and try and pre-train?
No, I think well, I'm not going to fund any pre-training company. But
There you go.
I think the models are good at 2 things today. If you want spicy, right? There's 2 things.
Yeah.
One is they're good at tool use, and 2 is good at RL. And that unlocks a ton of opportunity for businesses to come in to take a specific problem that is a business problem, not just a theoretical problem, but a business problem, and do it really freaking well.
Yep.
Because now the models are ready for that. And then you see a lot of the companies that are coming out that have been funded recently around just whether it's an RL gym or just like doing RL for enterprises, et cetera. But now that the models are ready for that, that's where you're going to see a lot more companies pop up, and you're going to see a lot more business problems getting solved.
So if somebody were perhaps to like democratize reinforcement learning, provide a hub for environments and a world for folks to build on, would that
pretty good.
potentially create some startups, new startups?
I think it's going to create a lot of startups.
Okay, I got a lot more angel checks to write down. Amazing. Now, conversely, Brian, you actually invested, as did I, in a company that is pre-training models after this, raised $2 billion.
Yeah.
Like, where's your head here? Is reflection and really no one else beyond them, or how do you see it?
I mean, I agree with Peter that like reinforcement learning is definitely delivering by far the biggest gains. Right, like I think something that none of us were expecting last year was that reinforcement learning generalizes better than SFT, better than imitation learning, better than any other training paradigm. And so, like reflection prior to raising the $2 billion round, they did train their model using reinforcement learning as the primary mechanism.
Yep. But
what I would say is that why is reflection going after pre-training, right? I think the thing that a lot of people miss is there's a lot of things on the pre-training side that are quite inefficient, and we might be able to see some pretty big gains if we tackle them. So one of the really interesting pre-training ideas I've seen, for example, is like delta net, right? Using linear attention, you can actually scale context windows to millions of tokens far more efficiently than the mechanisms used today. Like another idea has Inceptive by Stanford professor Stefano Erman. They're figuring out how to use diffusion models to improve coding generation, right? There's just a lot of inefficiencies on the pre-training side, and I would never fund a company that wants to just do imitation learning at bigger scale than GPT-4 or GPT-5, right? But if someone wants to create an architectural paradigm shift that can unlock 10x improvements, then yeah, absolutely game for these investments.
Yeah, I'm super curious to see where the diffusion language models go. I think that's going to be an interesting thing. Okay, we have just a little time for the Sarahs. I have one last spicy one, because this is we've all been in the space, I think, for a while. I've been now over a decade, and just in the last couple of years, there's all these startups that, especially most recently, the data annotation startups are now all of a sudden environment startups. There was the observability startups that turned into inference providers, that turned into, post-training. It's like everyone's kind of like these chameleons that are kind of changing with whatever the zeitgeist, is at the time, or so is that I mean, going back to your conviction, right? Conviction, your own firm. Like, is this when you see these chameleons? I mean, that doesn't seem like conviction to me. It seems like they're kind of going with whatever trend that OpenAI is doing on their models or whatever. Or where does this go? Like,
so our fund, like I think many of the best venture funds, like we run on a 12-year cycle. Right? And so something's going to be hot for 6 months as an idea, and then the developer community is going to move on, and it's like actually just not fundamentally that important. It is not useful to us. It's also just not interesting to work on. And so I actually learned this from like John Collison at Stripe, where I was like talking to I almost joined the company before I joined my last firm. This was like 14 years ago now. And he's just, like it really stuck with me because he said, you know, some markets are just bigger than others, and like they're permanent, right? And so I'll give you like an example. I sit on the board of an inference platform company, Base 10, and they're doing great. I've been on the board for 5 years. I think not everybody believed that inference was going to be that important 5 years ago. But from first principles, I'm like, this AI thing is just not happening if we're not going to use compute to run the models, and that actually feels pretty hard from a hardware systems complexity perspective, right? And so I do think our, like one thing that we're definitely gonna be wrong some of the time. I'll give you a less obvious one, right? Like we did 2 robotics companies over the last 18 months, right? We are not going to be, like the world is not going to decide that robotics was uninteresting or move on. We're either going to like climb a very large technical hill or we're not. But if we are right, it is really important. And so I think it's actually pretty simple filter of like, if you are right, is it going to matter in 10 years? And I think that narrows the scope of what you're working on quite a bit.
That's a pretty awesome way to look at it. Sarah, what do you think?
Yeah. So you know, I think the thing that really matters is the like commitment to the longer term vision. Like, what is the future that the founder wants to engender? The truth of the matter is that like we don't understand generative models, whether they're autoregressive language models or diffusion models, or other new types of architectures. Like we don't understand them. Like a second ago, you had said that like you thought models were really good at tool use. Like frankly, like I don't know. I think like computer use agents, browser use agents, like pretty unreliable, maybe like a 2 to 3 year time horizon. And so this is all to say that like we're still learning, what works, what doesn't work, et cetera. And as such, I think like startups just need to adapt. They need to be able to kind of like roll with the punches as we gain a better understanding of like what model capabilities actually are, what methods work. We have scaling laws, but like particularly like for RL, like our understanding of how RL scales is still pretty feeble. If you're not adapting, if you're not changing direction as new information becomes available, then I think you're dead. So like I don't see these pivots as startups like just responding to like the zeitgeist. I think more often than not, it's them responding to discovery and staying alive in their path to what is often a more consistent vision.
Yeah, I tend to look at teams that have research backgrounds that are actually doing active research in the space also. I think they hopefully can somewhat at least see the future, at least like understand where the direction is going, or see some through lines. Very contradictory takes, but also very good takes. Thank you so much. I know over time I'm getting the evil eye to get us off the stage. I want to thank our panelists. This was awesome.
Thanks for having us,
a round of applause. Yeah, cheers.